Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman, and this is Samsung's latest premium flagship phone, the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. It's ultra pricey for sure, but is it worth it? Let's take a deep dive into that question. And to do that, I'm going to break up this review into design, performance, battery, and camera sections, so you can skip to the parts that matter most to you. But before I start, like every YouTuber, I've got to ask you to subscribe. Hey, look, don't blame me, it's the law, so go subscribe. Now, back to the Galaxy S23 Ultra. Yeah, look, the most obvious thing to say about the Galaxy S23 Ultra is that it looks an awful lot like the Galaxy S22 Ultra. Same note-centric design, same basic S Pen at the base slot idea, and it's still rocking a 6.8-inch 120Hz capable AMOLED display. It's all good, it's all nice, but it's all very, very samey. Well, mostly. There are some changes though, and they are pretty subtle. The Galaxy S23 Ultra is marginally taller and wider than the S22 Ultra was, and it's also somewhat flatter on the sides. Now there's a couple of implications to that. Old S22 Ultra cases won't fit, or won't fit well, even if you cram them in there, and the S Pen is less likely to slip off the curved sides before, if that's important to you. It's still a pretty slippery little sucker though, so a case would be an advisable buy. It's also IP rated for water resistance, so while you shouldn't drop it in water, it should survive that kind of thing. Let's find out, shall we? Yeah, look, it's damp, but it's still working. Still, don't try this at home, kids. Controls on the S23 Ultra are pretty simple, with an in-display fingerprint reader that I've had very few problems with during my review testing time. On the side, there's a standard set of volume buttons and a configurable side button that by default launches Samsung's Bixby Assistant. Now look, I'm sure that someone at Samsung loves Bixby like it's a tiny kitten or something, but I'm not that person. Thankfully, you can reconfigure it to be a power button instead, which is what I did rather quickly. In terms of colours, Samsung Australia loaned me this green model. I've got to say, I don't love this particular green colour. I do wish it was a lot brighter. But at general retail, you'll also get the choice of lavender, cream, or phantom black. Now, Samsung itself will also sell graphite, sky blue, lime, and red models, though you won't be able to get those through telcos. Maybe direct importers down the track, I guess. One minor annoyance here, though it's certainly not new for the Galaxy S23 Ultra, is that while the S23 Ultra can be dual or single SIM, there's no microSD card expansion capability. Weird, because Samsung does make and sell microSD cards, but also personally annoying as I like being able to bump up the storage on my phones. Under the hood, Samsung packs in either 8GB or 12GB of RAM. You get 8GB with the cheapest model, or 12GB otherwise, alongside 256GB, 512GB, or 1TB of fixed onboard storage, no microSD expansion like I just said. You also get the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, and it's the first model with that particular SoC to land here in Australia. Except it's not just the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, it's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 mobile platform for Galaxy instead. Now, is that a silly marketing term? In some ways, yes, but it does actually signify a slightly faster CPU and GPU, clocked at 3.36 GHz for the CPU, compared to 3.2 GHz for the regular model, while the GPU gets bumped up to 719 MHz. Does that make the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra fast, I hear you ask? Well, yes, in all the ways that are likely to matter to you. I ran Geekbench 5's CPU test over the Galaxy S23 Ultra, and it was interesting to see it beaten out not only by Apple's iPhone 14 Pro, because basically little beats Apple's silicon in that test, but also Asus's ROG Phone 6D Ultimate. That's a phone that packs a Dimensity 9000 Plus processor in there, and it's not usual to see MediaTek up in that discussion beating Qualcomm, but it's great to see the competition. So if you do care just about numerical bragging, the Galaxy S23 Ultra ran third there. However, if you're after GPU performance bragging rights, the Galaxy S23 Ultra's Adreno 740 GPU really brings the goods, delivering the best 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme scores I've seen out of any phone ever. And yes, that does include Apple's iPhones if you really must. This thing flies for gaming, better than anything I've tested to date, and in most cases it's not even close. Here's the thing though. Benchmark scores make for interesting and sometimes useful comparisons, but the reality here is that the Galaxy S23 Ultra is absolutely powerful enough and then some for everyday users and even heavy-duty users too. You do also get the S Pen, of course, although here refinements are basically missing in action, really. Samsung doesn't really have any stylus competition in the smartphone space here, and it's pretty much resting on its laurels with the S Pen. And look, there's nothing wrong with that in a way. The S Pen absolutely works, and if you like the S Pen Life, it's good, but it's just not that much different from past S Pen experiences. You pop it out the base, you do your annotations or notes or captures or whatever it is that pleases you with the S Pen, and you get on with your day. It's all good, it's not better than it used to be. On the networks front, it's a tad annoying that while Samsung does make a model of the S23 Ultra with 5G covering both sub-6 GHz and millimetre wave for international markets, here in Australia, we just get the sub-6 GHz model. Look, it's still fast for 5G, it's still fine for 5G, and it'll connect to networks, but it could be faster if you're in a millimetre wave coverage area, and we're starting to see more of those in Australia. I really do want more out of my premium smartphone, Samsung. Sort it out. The official battery capacity for the Galaxy S23 Ultra hasn't changed a whit from last year's model, sitting at 5,000 mAh. Now, bringing in a more powerful processor and GPU, I had big worries about battery endurance. Look, to put it politely, Samsung's general trend for battery life on its premium smartphones hasn't been particularly good for years, and certainly not market leading. First of all, the bad news. It still isn't market leading. If you want my pick of the best battery life smartphone money can buy right now, that'd be the Apple iPhone 14 Pro Max. Here's the good news though. The Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra performs a lot better than the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra did, delivering many hours more battery life in my own tests, regimented and ad hoc, than last year's phone. Of course, battery usage and life varies depending on what you use it for, but for most users, this is an easy all-day battery life phone, and that's a good and very positive step forward for Samsung, and one that's long overdue. Samsung has stuck with the trends of the time for flagships though, opting not to include a charger in the box for the Galaxy S23 Ultra. It can take up to 45 watts from a cable charger or 15 watts wireless, but you will have to pay for those chargers separately if you don't already have one. It's also still compatible with Samsung's version of reverse wireless charging, or wireless power sharing in Samsung speak. Now that's not something you'll use all the time, but it certainly works. It's not bad, for example, for topping up the power on your wireless headphones. Of course, the other big hype factor for the Galaxy S23 Ultra is in its cameras, and especially those you'll find out the back. There's dual 10-megapixel telephoto lenses at 3x and 10x respectively, a 12-megapixel ultra-wide, and of course, the big boy, a 200-megapixel wide sensor. 200 megapixels is one hell of a marketing number, but is it overkill on a smartphone, more hype than usable reality? Nope, it's pretty good, with just a couple of caveats. I'll throw up some sample photos here while I talk you through them. So, all flagship phones these days sell themselves on their low light capabilities, and I've already done a video on how the S23 Ultra compares, which should be popping up on your screen now. Go give it a watch. Or, don't, I'm not your real dad anyway. The short form version there is that the S23 Ultra is a serious low light competitor across the board, and in many cases best in class. Good, in other words. But low light isn't its only trick. You do also get features like Samsung's Space Zoom and up to 100 times zoom. That's 100 times hybrid digital, of course. And I was curious to see how well this stacks up, given the inclusion of that new 200 megapixel sensor. Samsung's had 100 times Space Zoom for a while now, but it's never really been all that impressive. And 200 megapixels gives you a lot more theoretical room for the kind of digital cropping that you need for those extreme zooms. So here's a sample ultra-wide shot taken at a local park. All fine, all good. And here's the same shot taken with the standard 1x lens, albeit not at 200 megapixels because basically I didn't need it at that time. Why waste the storage space? Shifting up to 3x, all good. And again, up to 10 times, not a problem, because we're all still in standard optical ranges of those telephoto lenses. At 30 times, you can get decent shots, and they will be a whole lot better if you have a tripod or something to rest the phone on, of course, for stabilization. In this case, there's a handy fence that I'm using. But 100 times is not so good most of the time, especially freehand. It's still quite limited. It's still just a bit of a gimmick, really, because a lot of the shots that you take are not going to be all that usable. Still, the overall camera package on the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra is really good. What I appreciate here is that it's a nicely flexible camera system that encourages creativity. Not everyone is going to want to drop into pro mode straight away, but you absolutely can if that's your thing. There's plenty of guided photographic experiences to have here that can expand your vision of what photography can be. And I really do like smartphones that think that way and guide photographic exploration that way, and that totally is what the S23 Ultra does. On the video front, it also performs quite well. So here's some footage of me out for a walk with the S23 Ultra's Super Steady mode in play, for example. Now, I'd give a slight edge here to Apple's iPhones, which do still remain my gold standard for overall video quality. But unless you're shooting side by side with both, you're not 100% likely to notice that. And it runs well for footage like super slow-mo as well, if that's your thing. So that's the Galaxy S23 Ultra. Is it worth it? Look, I'm going to say yes, if you're after a premium smartphone in the Android space and you can meet the asking price. Samsung hasn't entirely reinvented itself here, and I can see the S23 Ultra copping some flack for that simple fact. There's not so much of an argument for anyone who owns a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, for example, or maybe even the S21 Ultra, to upgrade just yet. But if you're coming from an older phone, have at it, because you'll find the differences to be really, truly profound. I find it difficult to get all that excited about the Galaxy S23 or S23 Plus this year. They're very much my spec bumps. But the S23 Ultra is a winner. Anyway, that's my take on the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, which at the time of recording, I still have for about another week to test out and play around with. So if you've got any questions, fire them at me super fast. Thanks for watching all the way through this review. And as I always say around this time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.